Hello, it's Gareth. Welcome along to Somewhere on Earth from London. It is Tuesday, the 8th of October, 2024. And with us today is Ania, again, the multitasking Jacqueline of all trades. Here she is. How are you, Ania?
Indeed it is. Yeah, I'm all right. I'm good.
Good, lovely. Before we jump into the main business, could I share a thought with you?
Oh, please do, Gareth. Please do.
Here we are. So, my thought is about I just want to very briefly shout out in praise of the audio guide when you go to a museum or some kind of cultural site. And I know this is not breaking news. This is not new stuff to anybody. We've had audio guides for a very, very long time. But I think sometimes somebody just needs to say how brilliant the humble audio guide is, Ania. And having just been away myself and used quite a lot of audio guides, whether they're on my phone, which is great, you can download an app maybe, and then you can just do it all on your phone and not have to pay somebody else some money. Or when you are just given one of those little headset things from the museum just next to the gift shop and you take it around with you. Just the best thing ever, I think.
And what I really like about them, travelling with children, is that they have them for different levels as well. So, your 7-year-old doesn't have to walk around and try and learn, the political history of the fall of communism, for instance, like we did this summer in Gdańsk, and because they had a much simpler version, and they were climbing into exhibits that obviously the adults weren't, and they were happy as Larry going around and doing that because it was pitched at their level, and you can only do that thanks to technology.
Yeah, there we are. So it's a relatively simple technology, but oh my goodness, it just adds so much to going to some kind of artifact, and from an accessibility point of view, maybe for people who struggle to read the labels or whatever for any particular reason. And what I would say just quickly on this is that I've often talked about radio and audio as being the original virtual reality, and it's something that I'm only kind of half joking when I say it, because it's such an immersive medium, and you listen to an audio drama, for instance, and it just really does take you into a story world. So I've said virtual reality. I'm going to correct myself and say actually it's the ultimate augmented reality, certainly the audio guide. So you're standing looking at maybe some ancient Greek temple, and the audio guide has given you some context about how it may have been used for worship or what it may have looked like before it obviously became a ruin. And you really do, in your mind, you just kind of enhance what you're looking at with a mental picture that is conjured by the audio guide. So never mind all that stuff about radio and audio being the original virtual reality. I think it's the original augmented reality. I thank you.
Should we get on with it then?
Yes, please. Here we go. And coming up today, finally, there's a definite theme of quality information today, i.e. how to make the internet, and therefore all our lives, more full of trustworthy, equitable information and freer of rubbish and BS. We're hearing about a sister project of Wikipedia and how it's aiming to improve the quality of the stuff churned out by large language models. Also today, how 2/3 of quality news organisations are blocking chatbots from using their data, and why that's not necessarily a good thing. All of that right here on the Somewhere on Earth podcast. Now, first up, the organisation behind Wikipedia wants to improve the information ecosystem. Or basically, they want to adapt their vast stores of data so that all this data can work better with large language models, things like ChatGPT, for instance, or GPT-4. So basically, you have all this data about the world and people and everything else, and that feeds the models. And we then, of course, increasingly rely on the models to help us make sense of the world through the things that we ask the chatbots to do for us. Things like, hey, write me a recipe for a fish soup, or hey, help me with my essay, or hey, help me write a sonnet in the style of Shakespeare. Now, this is a story that might sound rather techie, and basically it is, but it matters to all of us, given that the world increasingly really is only as good as the way AI presents and processes its data. Now, counterintuitively, it turns out to make the data more machine readable, they're making it more human readable. And we'll unpack why that's the case, because that kind of confused me to start with. Ania has been hearing more from Lydia Pintscher, the portfolio lead product manager. And like Wikipedia, just to explain, Wikidata is collaboratively edited. And it's not just a big database, but one that links and illustrates all the information through relationships of meaning, if you like.
Wikidata is a knowledge graph, and it's a sister project of Wikipedia. Wikipedia has several sister projects like Wikimedia Commons, the Media Archive, Wikivoyage, the travel guide, and Wikidata as the knowledge graph. And what we do in Wikidata is we collect data about the world in a machine-readable form so that people can build applications on top of it. And what that means is we collect data about cities, about monuments, about people, about TV shows. Whatever you can think of, we probably have some data for it.
And so what are you doing with Wikidata now? It's, obviously quite a reliable source of information. So why are you looking to change it?
We are not changing Wikidata itself, but what we are doing is we are trying to publish the data that Wikidata has in a new format so that it becomes more useful in this new setting of large language models and generative AI that we are in now, so that we can help make these systems more trustworthy, more equitable, and more reliable at the end of the day.
And why do you need to do that? Why can't these large language models and the generative AI just pick up on what you have now?
So Wikidata has been built with the idea in mind that it brings together humans and machines. So a large community edits Wikidata every single day to collect data about the world and power stuff like your digital personal assistant on your phone. Now, all of this data is meant to be machine readable. That means it is there to be queried to ask really interesting questions of the data and so on. But in these new systems, large language models, ChatGPT, for example, they don't work like that. They work on human readable text, more like what you find in a Wikipedia article. So what we're doing now, in order to help make these systems better, we're transforming Wikidata's data into a format that they can consume more easily. Which is a bit ironic if you think about it, that we're making all of this beautiful structured data human readable text again, just so the machines can read it.
It does kind of like spin my head a little bit. It seems counterintuitive almost. So what you're saying is the Wikidata would say Berlin, capital, Germany. That's all we need to know. It's got all the information there. But the generative AI, large language models, need it in a human form, which is Berlin is the capital city of Germany.
Exactly. That is the first step we are taking now. And then what we're doing in the next step is vectorize this. This means that we're putting this into again, a new format where, for example, things like Berlin is the capital of Germany is encoded in a way that it's very close to, for example, Paris is the capital of France. And suddenly you can see very interesting combinations there. And again, both of these things are very helpful for these new types of AI that we're talking about today.
And how much data do you actually have to humanize?
Quite a bit. So in its 12 years of existence, in Wikidata, our community has amassed over 115 million items. So this is cities, actors, movies, monuments, whatever you can think of, stars. And then added data about each of them, including references where all of the data is coming from, so you can trace back if you think some of it is not actually accurate. So we're talking about a lot of data, but we're not talking about as much data quite quite a bit less data actually, than all of these new large language models are trained on. They're trained on gigantic amount of text, from Reddit discussions to Wikipedia articles to the Enron email exchanges and much more. So we're not quite in that order of magnitude.
Why is your data, in effect, a smaller amount than this generative AI? Because the amount of reliable information that comes from Wikipedia, just looking at that one example, is vast.
Yes. So why is Wikidata a bit smaller than all of the training data that these systems are trained on? It's very simple. We value quality over quantity. Our community is collecting all of this data and takes a massive amount of care that it is well referenced, up to date, and reliable for people to use. And for us, it's more important to have that than to have a lot of data that might be, let's say, a bit questionable.
A little bit questionable, a little bit biased. I mean, is this going to help potentially make generative AI slightly less biased against women, against people from ethnic minorities, against those maybe languages that aren't spoken as much, or certainly there isn't a lot of data about?
That is very much our hope, because such a minority group or someone who wants to support them could spend endless time to try to create enough content on the internet about these people, these topics, whatever you have, in order for it to maybe at some point be picked up by these large language models and make a dent in the training data there. If instead that time is spent on Wikidata and explicitly modeling data about this topic, that is much better invested time and much more effectively invested time, because you're going to make a much bigger impact with much less work.
So what timescales are we talking about then, Lydia? Have you started already?
We have started working on prototypes and testing over the last year. And our hope is that in 2025, we will have something that people can actually use to build cool new applications with the help of Wikidata's data there.
All right, so that is Lydia Pintscher talking to Ania. And we should say that this particular project on Wikidata, this is Wikidata Deutschland. So we thought we'd just point that out. So, Ania, that's quite a thought, isn't it? And quite a lot to get into in that interview, even to begin with, just explaining what Wikidata is. And I hope that we set it up all right in the introduction. But this really matters, doesn't it?
It does matter, because the Wikidata, it has this huge team of people behind it. And so it's in that old-fashioned way of making sure the data quality is really, really, really good. And therefore, if it's really, really good, if an AI is then trained on it, the AI should be really, really, really good, because you'll have unbiased, correct information going in, not rubbish. If you put rubbish in, you get rubbish out. Mm-hmm. So, that's key here.
Yeah, and so interesting about how they're making the Wikidata data set more machine readable by making it more human readable, by adding things like prepositions and verbs and things like that in order to, paradoxically in a way, make it more intuitive for these large language models.
Well, absolutely. Dom Caldwell, who's head of field engineering at EMEA at DataStax, who are one of the companies involved in this project. Now, he said, for this project, providing vector embeddings of Wikimedia data will improve the quality of responses that get generated. It can also be accessed so you get more up-to-date information rather than relying on old data that was used for training. You can get the latest version that is based on the most recent updates to Wikimedia. So he's also saying that many developers have to currently create their own embedding data, which can be very costly, hence only a few do it, particularly when they have a lot of data to use.
Right. Yeah. And that quote went on, didn't it? There's a lovely final bit.
There is no AI without data, and this provides a higher quality source for developers to use.
There you go. Yes. And in fact, I know somebody, a former student of mine, who's just started doing a PhD about the kind of ideology of AI. And I was having a just fascinating conversation with her about what that means. And I spent most of the conversation really asking her about the data side of things, just maybe even the ideology of whether data should be open source or proprietary, or data protection, and how, and then, she was saying, and there are all kinds of views about how we treat data. And there might be some, for instance, with a more libertarian ideology who might have a few issues with data protection, for instance. And so it gets into all that. And it ended up being a conversation about data. And I sort of said, I apologised a little bit, saying, I know you're really more on the AI side, and I've just blabbed on about data. And she said something very similar. Yes, there is no AI without data. So it all ties
Data
in.
is the key. Data is absolutely the key, and I think any data quality manager out there should be paid at least 3 times as much as they currently are. And the fact that my husband does that is beside the point.
I was going to say, it's almost as if you know one of these people. Yeah, so there we are. Treble the pay of data quality people, please. And Anya will have a nice holiday next year. All right,
please.
and the family, of course. All right, well, let's stay on the topic of data and how to help the information that courses through the internet and into our lives be quality information. Now, it turns out that 2/3 of quality news websites block chatbots from accessing their information. Now, on the face of it, you might think that's quite a good thing. After all, people have invested in these high-quality news sources. They don't necessarily want AI chatbots just helping themselves to all that good stuff and regurgitating it. But the problem is that the chatbots then go on to train themselves on the less good stuff, the stuff that they can get access to. That's according to an analysis from NewsGuard, an organisation founded to tackle misinformation. The enterprise editor at NewsGuard is Jack Brewster, and guess who he's just been speaking to? I'll give you a clue. It's Anya. Here we go.
This is definitely a very complicated story, and I wanted to give sort of a window into this. That is something I think a lot of people don't necessarily think on the day-to-day when they're using these chatbots. But large language models are only as good as the data that goes into them. And the way that these models are trained is people basically, you can think of it as basically a word soup that people just throw, or engineers throw tons and tons and tons and tons of information into a vat of soup on a stovetop and use that to fine-tune the model. And increasingly, and understandably, news sources that are have been used to train these models are saying, wait a second, I want to get compensated for my content being included in that soup as an ingredient in that soup. And when that's been happening, it's sort of created this sort of bifurcated sourcing on the internet for what AI companies can use freely and what they can't use. And so what we did is we looked at the sites that are blocking AI companies from crawling their sites and which sites aren't. And by using our ratings, NewsGuard rates the reliability of news sources, we were able to determine that more reliable sites are blocking chatbots from accessing their data than unreliable ones.
So the chatbots do this by automatically, it's called crawling, isn't it? Is that right? That they literally just sift through it and gather up what's there. And you said 67% of the websites that you looked at, and you looked at what, 500 or so?
Yeah, about 500 sites. So that 67% just comes from the basically all the sites that we rate as being, or a lot of the sites that we rate as being higher quality. So there's a few layers here, but NewsGuard basically rates sites as being on a score between 0 to 100, and so we're able to sort of determine by our ratings which sites are highly credible and which sites are less credible. And so that's how we conducted this study. We used our data and just matched it up with our own research about, which anyone can do, about which sites block web crawlers. Which web crawlers, I know I'm throwing a lot of terms around here, but you can think of web crawlers as just being gatherers, basically, like information gatherers. They go out and collect as much information as possible and come back and allow engineers to feed that data into whatever source they want.
So good data, good sources of data, reliable information. Those sites are blocking these crawlers, these gatherers, and so therefore they collect their information from much less reliable sources. Ergo, what they then produce, these chatbots, is of a much lower quality. Is that what's happening?
That's the concern. I want to step back slightly and just state that the issue is definitely a little bit more complicated than we're describing here. And I note that in the article, it's a little bit harder to sort of describe over in a podcast. But what your listeners should know is that, like, that's basically correct, but there are some layers here. Mm-hmm. Some of these chatbots have inked private deals with certain news outlets. So if you've been following the news on this, there's the Wall Street Journal and other news outlets have inked deals directly with AI models to have their data freely used, and so that makes this analysis a little bit harder, right? It makes it a little bit more difficult to sort of say definitively that this means that chatbots are less reliable. It's likely that, but we don't know all the sources that are going into these chatbots, and that's purposeful. That is like highly confidential data, and for good reason, right? There's an AI war going on right now in the U.S. and other countries where all these language models, these companies that operate these language models, are competing with one another.
So it's all a bit shady. It's very nuanced, isn't it? It's not a simple picture by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, what would NewsGuard like to see being done now?
Well, I think as a journalist, I'm concerned about the reliability of these systems, right? I mean, like, I'm worried about them being weaponized to spread a viral false narrative at scale. I mean, this basically gives you the capacity of 5,000 writers at your disposal, right? And you can just type in anything now and generate thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of articles in the blink of an eye. So I'm concerned about that. I'm also concerned about people using these as search engines, like they would Google, and getting a response that they use to cite a false narrative. We've seen this done repeatedly before. That a source on the internet, a social media user, will take a screenshot of a ChatGPT prompt that they did and say, "Look, see, ChatGPT says that the 2020 election was stolen." I'm just making that up. I'm not saying that necessarily happened, but I'm saying that that is what we've seen misinformation spreaders do on social media: cite these models to further their narrative. This is a really complicated issue, but I mean it's also one that everyone should care about, because it's going to affect them. These models are going to be used everywhere, and this problem will definitely come to their doorstep.
Jack Brewster of NewsGuard talking to Ania, and here we are then, Ania, getting into this whole discussion around journalism, what it is, what the value is, and indeed what the cost is of journalism, and justifying those costs in some cases.
It sounds as though we've had this conversation before off air, haven't we, Gareth? Or, we talk about this so much, about the value and the cost of journalism, because it takes so much time and effort to research and verify stories. It's so costly. So it's understandable that news organisations, good ones at least, who have invested a lot of time, a lot of money, and a lot in the people who are reporting the stories, they want to protect their work. And Jack mentioned in there that some organisations do have partnerships, yeah. So with certain chatbots, for instance. But again, we're back to the same conversation that we had before. It's rubbish in, rubbish out. So if this AI is gathering the data from websites that perhaps might not get everything right, the rubbish that they put in is the rubbish they're going to be putting out.
It's a thought, isn't it? And I mean, are there ways out of this, do you think? I mean, you've already mentioned, for instance, that some really, good, reputable news organisations do deals with large language models. But besides that, I mean, are there ways out of this conundrum? That if you are, for instance, say I ran my own news website, I'd like to think that I'd be civically minded enough to want to share all that information, but I might have investors saying, well, no, we've put a lot of money into this and we don't just want to hand all this stuff over to large language models so that people can then just kind of rewrite our copy, as it were, and then possibly monetize it themselves. We're not doing that. So you can see quite a disincentive, especially for more commercial but quality news organizations, in holding back their information and blocking the chatbots. Are there ways out of this dilemma, Ania?
Oh gosh, I don't know.
No,
I mean, quite simply, it's going to be a short
discussion. You to
discussion.
necessarily, but
What can you do when you have investors breathing down your neck one way or another, saying, no, this is costing us money, we can't give it away for free? It is certainly a dilemma that I think many places are now facing, and unfortunately this is why there's so much misinformation out there, because that usually is free, isn't it?
That is the problem. And we're back to some of what we discussed last week as well. So, yeah, who knows the way out of it? I guess new business models will have to emerge, and at some point everything will just be fine. Yeah, if only. But thanks very much, Ania, for that interview. And of course, we have more discussion and good stuff on the subscription version of this podcast, but for now we'll leave it. Thank you very much indeed to you for listening, and to production manager Liz Tuohy. Thanks to me, Gareth, for presenting all this, and to Ania for literally doing everything else again this week. Nice one, Ania, and we'll see you next time.